Joan of Arc. You hear the name and you probably picture a teenage warrior, right? A visionary, a hero of France, a saint. She's easily one of the most famous figures in all of history. But the story we all think we know, well, that's really only scratching the surface.
Yeah, this is the Joan we all recognize. Dressed in armor, holding a banner, the very picture of faith and courage. But the real story of this young woman is way more complicated, and the battle that truly defined her legacy wasn't just for a city, it was for her own identity.
So, let's get right into it, because at the absolute core of her story is a fight that might seem really strange to us now, a battle over clothing that would, believe it or not, lead to her death and shape her legend for centuries to come.
Okay, but first, to really get Joan, we have to get the world she lived in. And back in the early 15th century, France was a kingdom that was, to put it mildly, on its knees.
You see, for decades, this brutal, grinding war with England had just been tearing the country apart. The English controlled huge chunks of France, the French king was basically in hiding, and the army's morale, it was completely in the gutter.
And if you want a perfect snapshot of just how bad things were, look no further than this one battle, famously called the Battle of the Herrings. You had a combined French and Scottish army of about 4,000 soldiers, completely crushing the English force of 1,600, right? Nope. It was a total disaster for the French. They lost hundreds of men. The English? Barely any. This was the state of the war right before Joan showed up.
In fact, this loss was so bad that French commanders were seriously thinking about just giving up the key city of Orleans. The whole situation was just desperate. France didn't just need a new general, it needed a miracle. And that kind of desperation creates an opening for someone nobody would ever expect.
And into this total crisis walks our hero. But her story doesn't begin in a castle or a court. It begins in a tiny village with a teenage girl.
Joan was born into a world that was all about farming, faith, and just trying to survive. Her life was shaped by the seasons and the constant, looming threat of war. By any measure, she was just an ordinary girl, living in some pretty extraordinary times.
But then, around the age of 13, everything changed. Joan started having these incredible experiences. She said she saw a blinding light and heard a voice that she knew was Saint Michael the Archangel. And he wasn't alone. Soon, other saints joined in. Their message was crystal clear, and honestly, unbelievable. She had been chosen by God to save France and to get the rightful king crowned.
So how do we make sense of these visions today? Well, for Joan, it wasn't even a question. They were direct orders from God. But modern historians and scientists have suggested other possibilities, things like epilepsy or maybe even poisoning from a fungus that grows on rye bread. But here's the thing. Whether they were divine or medical, the result was the same. They gave her this absolutely unshakable sense of purpose.
And she didn't just sit on these visions, she acted. She went to a nearby town and demanded, not asked, demanded an escort to see the king. The commander there naturally thought she was crazy and sent her away, twice. But then Joan made this uncanny prediction about a major French defeat near Orléans. And when the news of the Battle of the Herrings proved her right, the commander finally gave in.
I mean, can you just picture the scene? This teenage peasant girl, who's dressed like a man for the dangerous journey, just walks right into the royal court, finds the future king and says, "Hey, I'm here. God sent me to save you and the kingdom." Her confidence was so absolute, so powerful, that she actually won him over. And before long, she was riding at the head of the French army.
Now, her military career is the stuff of legend, lifting the siege of Orleans, for example. But after she was captured by enemy forces, the entire battlefield shifted. Her enemies stopped focusing on her sword and started focusing on her clothes.
So, Joan gets captured, sold to the English, and put on trial for heresy by a court of clergy who were all on England's side. See, they couldn't exactly convict her for beating them in battle, so they had to attack her on religious grounds. And the central piece of evidence they used against her was the fact that she wore men's clothes.
Now, to understand why her clothing was such an explosive issue, we have to talk about this really interesting medieval idea called the holy transvestite. It was this tradition where some female saints would disguise themselves as men to go live in monasteries, and it was actually seen as a sign of extreme piety.
So you're probably thinking, okay, then what's the big deal? Well, here is the absolutely critical distinction. Those holy transvestites were hiding their identity to live pious lives. Joan hid nothing. She was very openly a woman, wearing men's clothes, leading an army, and claiming her authority came directly from God. This was a radical challenge to the entire power structure. She was bypassing priests, bishops, everything.
She was a threat not just to the church's authority, but to the whole social order. And that made her incredibly dangerous.
For Joan, what she wore was a small matter, just something God told her to do. But for her judges, it was an abomination, a sin against nature. At one point, she briefly gave in and wore a dress, but then she went back to wearing men's clothes. And that was it. That's what they needed. By going back to her so-called sin, they could now label her a relapsed heretic, a crime that had only one punishment, death.
And even with her life on the line, she refused to back down. For her, this was never just about the clothes. It was about her mission, it was about her identity, and it was about her direct line to God. She would not, could not, renounce what she believed he had commanded her to do.
That defiance sealed her fate. But in a truly bizarre twist of history, her execution wasn't the end of her story. It was really just the beginning.
At just 19 years old, the young woman who had literally saved France was executed as a criminal. For her enemies, that was supposed to be the end of it. But what they had really done was create a martyr.
I mean, just look at this journey after her death. It's incredible. Only 25 years later, a new trial, this one authorized by the Pope, completely overturned the verdict and declared her innocent. And then, almost 500 years after that, the very same institution that condemned her, the Catholic Church, officially made her a saint.
Her legacy today is this powerful, flexible symbol that's been adopted by all sorts of groups. She's an icon of French patriotism, a model of incredible faith, and a hero for anyone who's ever had to stand up to a powerful, corrupt system.
So who was the real Joan? Was she a saint, a nationalist icon, a proto-feminist, or maybe, as some people argue today, a symbol of gender nonconformity? The amazing thing is, her story isn't just some dusty piece of history. It's a living thing that every generation reads and rewrites, finding new meaning in the incredible tale of the girl who fought a battle over what she wore.